Heading into Week 8 fantasy football, there are still 9 total kickers that are providing you at least 10 fantasy points per game. Let that sink in. While your running back 2 or your wide receiver 2 is out right now with injury, yeah, your kicker's replacing that production. And I'm the only fantasy YouTuber who goes through kickers on a weekly basis, so make sure to go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. So going down to our first tier right here, I've got Kaimi Fairbairn, my guy, for the Houston Texans, taking on the Indianapolis Colts this week in Houston. So listen, Kaimi Fairbairn has really been just as consistent as it gets. This guy has only missed 2 kicks this year. He missed 2 field goals, but he's also hit a 59-yard long field goal. This guy's averaging 12 fantasy points per game. He has done absolute work, and this is one of those games where it's a divisional game, and I expect them to put up points on the Indianapolis Colts. They're going to come in mad offensively because they just lost. I mean, Stroud didn't even throw for 100 yards versus the Green Bay Packers here. They're going to come in really mad in this game, and I'm expecting a good effort from that offense, putting Kaimi Fairbairn in so many situations for field goals and extra points. At number 2, Cam Dicker comes out of nowhere. Where did you come from, my man? Taking on the New Orleans Saints at Los Angeles this week. Cam Dicker was awesome last week. He was incredible last week. Shot all the way up to the kicker number 9 on the year after some dud performances, man. The past 2 weeks from Cam Dicker, 12 fantasy points, 21 fantasy points. And here's the reality, like, this is a very good offense to be in for a kicker on most weeks because this offense isn't super score friendly as far as getting touchdowns go. You could see the amount of extra points that Cam Dicker has totally kicked this year. He's at 8 extra point attempts, where he has 16 field goal attempts. He's doubling the amount of extra points with field goal attempts. So this offense gets them down there because obviously Herbert's still good enough to do that. And J.K. Dobbins is obviously going to be taking a lot of load for that. But their playmakers are starting good enough to get in the end zone consistently. So Cam Dicker left with a lot of field goal attempts. This week against the Saints, I don't think they'll have problems moving the ball. I've got Cam Dicker at number 2 because they'll put him in opportunities here. And then rounding out the tier at number 3, Younghoe Koo. I know he had a really bad week last week. I get it. It sucked. I actually played somebody who had Younghoe Koo, but I'm taking it for the rebound this week. At the Tampa Bay Bucks this week, fantastic matchup. It's actually relatively high over-under, considering the injuries that Tampa Bay just suffered with their 2 wide receivers here. And I think a lot of it has to do with Younghoe Koo, and this Atlanta offense, I think, is going to be able to move the ball pretty well. I think Younghoe Koo is in good position this week. Listen, this offense took a beating last week by the Seattle Seahawks, man. They played a really good defense. The Bucs are getting scored on by everybody, man. They can't stop a nosebleed. So I think that just based on the way that the Falcons played the first time in this matchup, it doesn't make a difference to me whether this matchup's in Tampa or in Timbuktu. I think Younghoe Koo's got a really good game this week. Dropping down to our next tier, Will Reichard of the Minnesota Vikings comes through last week, and I think he's going to come through again tonight at the Los Angeles Rams tonight. I think that Will Reichard is another good play in fantasy football. He came through in a big way last week. Actually had his second biggest game in fantasy this year, only behind week 5 versus the New York Jets. So the way this offense is actually starting to trend a little bit here is they're actually starting to kick more field goals than extra points. So those first several weeks, obviously Minnesota was scoring touchdowns on everybody. But the last 2 weeks that they have played, they've actually slowed down because they've stumbled a little bit offensively, leaving Will Reichard available for more opportunities with field goals. So here's the deal. Either way you look at it, whether you think that Will Reichard is a good field goal kicker this week or he's a good extra point kicker this week, bottom line is this offense will get him down there in opportunities for him to get field goals and extra points against a bad defense versus the Los Angeles Rams tonight. I've got Will Reichard here at number 4. Brandon Aubrey at number 5 may be stupid. I mean, I may come off as really dumb for saying this right here. I'm losing faith in Brandon Aubrey as a kicker. Not because he stinks. Brandon Aubrey's been fantastic this year, man. He's averaging 13.7 fantasy points per game. They're playing the San Francisco 49ers in San Francisco, a team that's in a bad mood, by the way. So listen, Brandon Aubrey is rarely bad. Like, literally, if you go down his game log this year, it's nothing but good. Nothing outside, nothing below 10 fantasy points. So this dude has been incredible. Like I said, I may be really dumb for putting him this low, But I don't think that this is a good matchup for Dallas, man. I think they're going to get crushed by the 49ers, and I think it's going to end up being an opportunity where the only way Brandon Aubrey can rebound and actually get good fantasy production, maybe like it was against Detroit, where they actually come back and just get some garbage time points. That's the only way, but of course, Brandon Aubrey, the way he's going, you just can't sit a guy like this at the kicker position. And at number 6, I've got Will Lutz of the Denver Broncos versus the Carolina Panthers. Will Lutz is coming through these days too, man. Last Thursday night, he was awesome. 18 fantasy points, and he kicked 4 field goals in that game. And again, it reminds me very similarly to the Los Angeles Chargers offense, the Pittsburgh Steelers offense, where it's like they have enough talent to move them down there consistently and get them in position to give them opportunities for their kicker. But they're not always going to get in the end zone. So it's like, it's actually a really good scenario to be in for a kicker. And Will Lutz is benefiting from that. And this week against the Panthers, everything just lights up, am I right? It's like last week versus the New Orleans Saints, except they're taking on a worse defense. Way worse defense with the Carolina Panthers. So I don't think the Denver Broncos have an issue moving the ball again. I think Will Lutz is another great play this week in fantasy football. And I'll tell you one thing that's also going to be a great play this week is Dak Prescott hitting the higher on his projection, which is 0.5 total yards on Underdog. Got to take advantage of it. Hit the higher on this one. You're going to win free money. Go down in the comments, grab the link that's there. Use code FFN. They'll give you 50% deposit match up to $1,000 of bonus cash when you use code FFN and play this Dak Prescott projection and hit the higher on it this week on Sunday night versus the San Francisco 49ers. Dropping down to our next tier right here. Harrison Butker at number 7 at the Las Vegas Raiders. Look, I said this a couple weeks ago, the moment that they lost Rashee Rice. I think that without a stable wide receiver 1 there, actually helping provide passing upside, I think they're going to stall out in a lot more drives. And listen, since then, we've been 1 for 2. We've been 1 for 2 since then. New Orleans in week 5, he had 14 fantasy points, and then against San Francisco, he only had 4. Now, they didn't kick any field goals last week. I actually think this might be a little bit of a low-key tough matchup versus the Las Vegas Raiders. I expect the Chiefs to win, and I expect them to win decidedly, but I don't rule out the fact that the Raiders could stop them. It's very unexplainable. But just last year, the last team, did you know, that the Chiefs have lost to in total? The last team that beat them was the Raiders on Christmas Day of last year. So this team has an underdog quality to them, as you saw earlier this year from them beating the Baltimore Ravens. They've got an underdog quality to them, and as bad as they look right now, obviously Harrison Butker, I think, is going to be fine this week because they're going to get him down there now that they've got actually a potential wide receiver 1 with DeAndre Hopkins, but I don't see them as a super high upside kicker this week. Chris Boswell at number 8. I don't see tons of upside this week either. Versus the New York Giants here. Now, let's clear this up. Chris Boswell, once we go through these last 4 kickers, you'll understand, obviously, I'm not trying to say that he's got no upside. Chris Boswell's been fantastic. He's actually the number 1 kicker on the year right now. He's averaging 12.6 fantasy points per game. He's been pretty awesome in fantasy football. But here's my thing with it. I think the Giants defense is a lot tougher, actually, than the Jets defense is. I really do believe that. I don't think the Jets defense is very good. So I think this matchup is a lot tougher for Chris Boswell and company. So always is what's going to keep him inside of the top 10, like at the very least, is going to be his field goal attempts that he sees. But I don't see them getting down there and scoring 30 plus points like they just did against the Jets. That's pretty ridiculous what they just did. So I think they have a tougher time scoring points against the Giants. They've got now game footage to watch on Russell Wilson. So I do think that Chris Boswell ends up kicking a little bit less often than he did last week against the New York Jets this week. And rounding out the tier, Brandon McManus of the Green Bay Packers here at the Jacksonville Jaguars this week. Brandon McManus, his first game of action, pretty good in fantasy football, all things considered. 7 fantasy points he made every single kick, including the game winner. So Brandon McManus still kind of looks like the guy that we remembered him at last year for the Jacksonville Jaguars. If you remember, he was actually a really good kicker in fantasy football. Brandon McManus at this point of his career, he's just like, he looks really good last week. So that's kind of what we have to go off of right here, right? Now, this is obviously against his former team, revenge game narrative at the kicker position. I love a revenge game narrative, but Brandon McManus, I do think it may be in a very decent scoring upside matchup here. So I've got him at number 9 because I think there's plenty of scoring to go on this week. Dropping down to our last tier right here. Evan McPherson at number 10 versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Evan McPherson's been a little bit of a wild ride this year. He spent time inside the top 12. He spent time outside of the top 12. The last 3 games have not been good for Evan McPherson. And the reality is because they're not kicking many field goals. The past 3 games, 1 field goal a game. And they're kicking like 3 extra points per game. So they've actually been way more efficient offensively. Bottom line here, I think that Philadelphia has looked good enough defensively to force a couple field goal attempts. But the Bengals offense, they're just scoring at will. I think this is going to be a big scoring game. And I do think that Evan McPherson is simply just going to have a lot of opportunities. So he's down here at number 10. I actually think he's got more upside to do a lot more this week. Anders Carlson of the San Francisco 49ers versus the Dallas Cowboys. I'm cracking up because when I was ranking these kickers before I started filming, the 49ers are so ravaged by injuries. It goes down to their freaking kickers, man. Jake Moody's still out this week. Matthew Wright, their backup kicker that they signed in place of Jake Moody, he's on the IR. It's so bad, guys. So Anders Carlson last week does just fine, right? He does just fine from a fantasy perspective. He gets 8 fantasy points because he kicks 2 good field goals, but he misses the extra point. So obviously he's not exactly the perfect guy, and he wasn't last year with the Green Bay Packers. But I do think that in this matchup versus the Cowboys, where, again, the 49ers are going to come in a bad mood in this game, they don't have tons of talent, obviously, offensively, as I just said, because they're ravaged with injuries. They're going to get down there plenty of times versus a weak Cowboys defense, but probably stall out quite a bit. So Anders Carlson does have upside because he plays for a ravaged 49ers offense that will get down there, but just come up short because they've got nobody to play for them. And then ending it off at number 12, I'm sorry guys, Cairo Santos at number 12, the Chicago Bears out to watch the Commanders this week. I think Cairo Santos actually is in line for a good performance this week. Look, the Bears are coming off a bye week here. They're on a hot streak as well. The Bears have actually looked pretty good in fantasy, all things considered, just in real football as well. Now, Cairo Santos started off the year really hot, and ever since then, he's kind of had like 6, 7, 5 fantasy points per game. But look into this Washington defense right here. The more and more the Chicago Bears offense comes together, and the more and more that we see the Washington Commanders defense, they actually look better than advertised earlier in the year, and the Bears offense obviously is looking better every week too. So I think that could provide a good combination here for Cairo Santos to get down there in range and then have the Bears offense maybe stall out a couple times and then also kick a couple field goals as well. So I do see Cairo Santos as being a good play this week. So let me know how your lineup is looking for this week, and if you want to see the top 12 defense rankings for this week, click on this video right here.